Great. Again, let's get the mic in here. So can everybody hear me? Okay, good. And I love that we are among some smaller people, so that about... and also, we're so grateful to be here with all of you. So I'm a Chicago-based curator, which also means that I'm a US-based curator, and it's a particularly hard week to be from the United States, and I just want to acknowledge that. And especially in the face of a lot of the work that we're talking about here and through projects like TULCA Assembly that are really focused on thinking about how we can take better care of ecologies and cities and each other. It feels, at least at the federal level in the United States, like we're going to be a bit further away from that capacity for a while, which is tough. It also reinforces a sense of the importance of this kind of assembly, of actually, creating work that is grounded in specific contexts and specific places, but networked and linked in solidarity with folks who are doing related work or kind of overlapping work in other places, because we need to see each other and stay connected all the more right now. So I'm especially appreciative of this moment and this time with you. It also really relates to what I'm going to be sharing today. I've been thinking about curatorial practice as an ecological practice, and going back within that to the root of the word, to eikos, the Greek word for dwelling or home, which is part of the root of ecology. And it's interesting then to think about a curatorial practice that is grounded in a context. Like, what does it mean to dwell in a place, in a field, in a kind of institutional context? And for me, I've worked with Becky a lot, so, and also a bit jet lagged, so thank you for also bearing with that. But as Michelle was saying, a lot of my roles up to this point have been institutionally based. That's been part of the context within which I've shaped my curatorial practice. It's been part of a place that I've dwelt. And through that, I've really been interested all the way through my practice in following lines of socially and ecologically engaged work, place-based practices, where part of the center of gravity of the work exceeds the institutions, kind of outside the institutional space. And it's been a real privilege to be inside, to be inhabiting, dwelling within these institutional spaces, and working with artists and activists and others to try to make space to bring these practices into institutional homes that maybe are slightly uneasy fits, but can be really important in terms of reaching wider publics, in terms of making space in art history and in theoretical conversation for the work to kind of move through the world in other ways. But of late, I've also, I've shifted my practice after many years in Chicago, and then working in Canada, working in Virginia. During the pandemic, I did something that I think a lot of people did or thought about, which was to go home. Went back to Chicago, just realizing that was a place that that's a place that I dwell, and it's a place where I have the kind of deepest set of intellectual and creative and communal relationships. All kinds of family, actual family, friend family, colleagues. That was the place that I needed to ground my practice. And from that, the strength of that place, that I could then also experiment with moving into a fully independent practice, in the sense that, of course, it's always networked and connected to institutional partners and collaborators, but where, in my prior roles, where I was, a chief curator or so forth, you're really, your agenda is partly shaped by the institution. You're shaping it, but you're also a representative of the institution. And it's felt really important to be able to shift my own center of gravity, my own positionality, and to be setting up a practice where I'm working alongside artists and activists and scholars in other ways, where we're kind of in cahoots. As my colleague Nato Thompson always used to sign his emails this, Nat Shears, in cahoots. So I feel like I'm now working in cahoots with artists, and so I'm going to spend time through this presentation focused on one particular instance of that. And I should say also, like when I moved back to Chicago, there was this thing that happened which was a little bit like Ocean's 11, where, I was on my way out of the institution, then it was like, one last caper, all that dope. So I went back to the University of Chicago's Smart Museum of Art, where I had worked for many years in curatorial roles, and was pulled back in to be interim director during a time of leadership transition. And that was amazing to do, but it also helped really reinforce and clarify my desire to move out of that kind of institutional role. And kind of partway through that time, I got this amazing email from Randy Cook, Makwala Randy Cook, who I did not know before, and he introduced himself as artist and hereditary chief of the Mamtigila First Nation in British Columbia, and asked if I might be interested in thinking alongside a group of artists, scientists, and Indigenous knowledge keepers who were working on questions of land-based sovereignty and climate change. And I think it was like the fastest email response I've ever made. It was like, absolutely, let's talk. And it really felt like a validation of this decision, because I wouldn't have had the time for the deep relational work and a kind of collaborative sharing that was on offer in this project. And it also felt really interesting because, as Michelle said, I'm working on PhD research that's focused on Chicago. So to really, to have a kind of ethic within my own curatorial research practice that's very grounded in artists who have a long-term relation to place and are really bringing thick attention to their relation to a specific set of ecological and historical contexts and possibilities, and to be, again, thinking alongside them. But to recognize that if you do that too much, especially in a kind of conservative political climate, there's the potential to kind of pull inward into your bubble, and to really get kind of provincial or kind of navel-gazing in those sorts of projects. So it feels really important to be able to stand with strength within a specific context, but also to be porous, to be in contexts like this, and to have other modes of relation across place. So it's been very interesting to be developing something that Lucy Lepard, the really brilliant curator and writer, talks about as a multi-local. Sorry, now I'm misremembering the term. A sense of place that is kind of grounded between two different or more than one place. Again, I'll just blame the jet lag on forgetting that specific word. But to really think about what it means to have a long-term connection. And so Randy, in his case, he's working on questions of sovereignty and trying to return or regain access to hereditary lands that his people have been displaced from for a long time, and under the control of others who treat the land not as kin but as property. The forests are being clear-cut at rapid rates. I don't know if any of you have a kind of image that you would conjure in your head of the Canadian wilderness, and it's probably full of magnificent old-growth trees. And about 3% of those old-growth trees are left in British Columbia. They're being cut at an incredibly rapid pace. And that has all kinds of knock-on effects, not only for cultural practices that require kind of a relationship to healthy ecosystems and to trees specifically, to these cedar trees that form the basis of a lot of Kwakwaka'wakw regalia, but also the kind of ongoing colonialized displacement of people from those lands. And he reached out to Suzanne Simard, who is an amazing ecologist, a pioneering forest ecologist, who you may come across her book, Finding the Mother Tree, which is a part memoir, part kind of journey of scientific exploration, sharing her development as a practitioner, as a kind of a forestry researcher, who became a real leader in understanding at a biological level with great detail the functioning of the mycorrhizal networks that sit beneath our soil, or within our soil beneath the trees. And part of her research, or one of the key aspects of her research that's been so moving to so many people, is the fact that she shows that trees talk to each other. These plants talk to each other through these fungal networks within the soil. And in an old-growth forest, they're incredibly rich and incredibly deep. And they're not only kind of communicating, but they're also sharing nutrients. They're sharing resources. They're helping to protect each other in times of stress. And it really pushed against a lot of forestry kind of common wisdom, which has said that we thrive, that forests thrive as we thrive through competition rather than collaboration. So Suzanne's research really pushes against that. So Randy reached out to her saying, it really seems like your Western science and our traditional knowledge are quite in alignment, and we also have a shared interest in preserving the health of these forest ecosystems in British Columbia, so perhaps we could get together. And Suzanne immediately said yes, because she's that kind of person. And she and Randy and a group of other scientists and artists, like 8 people total, went and spent a week on the land just to see what would emerge. This was in 2021. And that's now grown into the Awi'nakola Foundation. It's a foundation that Randy established. It now has a set of things that it's working on, but art is one component within that. There are several other artists who I'll show shortly, and they also reached out to me to think alongside them as a curator, which is also kind of flipping the usual curatorial practice where the curator invites the artist, as Michelle did here. In this case, the artist invited the curator, and it was a lovely inversion of the norm. And I guess in another inversion of the norm, we spend a lot of time camping. We spend time together on the land every summer to really experience the context there and to kind of co-research alongside each other, to share knowledge with a wide set of people that include activists, community members, elders, youth, artists, scientists, policymakers. And we have the chance to encounter the kind of the devastation of the clear-cut forest, to learn about the resilience of salmon population moving through the waters, and also just to spend time relaxing and to connect and to be with each other in quieter moments, and also in raucous ones. There's a lot of laughter that happens with this group. So these are images from the first year that I was with the group on in 2022, and went back to Chicago. Quite a different context. This is an image, flying into the city and looking out over the kind of, flat diamond grid of, civic property there in Chicago. And I knew immediately that I needed to take advantage of my remaining time at the University of Chicago with these institutional networks to try to bring my colleagues to Chicago. So we did. This is an image of us. It's a kind of classic tourist shot in Chicago. I probably should have shown what we're standing in front of, which is Anish Kapoor's Bean, which is this giant work of kind of traditional public art. It's in that genre. It's a great piece, and there's this moment where you get this kind of distorted reflection. And so the artists are Randy to the left, Paul Wald, who works primarily in sound but also photography, kind of going clockwise. Kelly Richardson, who works in digital art. There's me, the lone curator in the bunch, and Lindsay Delarond, who is a Mohawk artist who works in land-based dramaturgy and performance. And so it's an interesting cross-cultural, kind of practitioner mix. And we've talked a lot as a team about what it means to be working in intentional alliance across cultures. It's an Indigenous-led effort, but one where we are all bringing different capacities, different kind of cultural backgrounds. Kelly, in particular, was really interested to know that I was going to be here because her family background is Irish. And so we've been talking a lot about also what it means to think in solidarity with people who have been navigating other kinds of land-based histories and other kinds of colonial relationships that then get kind of combined into a kind of white colonial presence in Canada, right? So it's a lot of complexity, but also I think a lot of really interesting things to unpack. Over this week, we did some things that's actually not so different than what we're going to be doing together as the TULCA Assembly kind of moves from Galway kind of across Ireland over the next week. A combination of formal presentations, which we really thought of as a way to plant seeds for potential future collaborations at the University of Chicago, some of which were talks, some of which were performances. This is Lindsay here leading us in a performance. We met with amazing colleagues. We moved out, and some of them were in formal spaces, but most of it was really connecting with colleagues who are doing land-based research in Chicago, land-based projects in Chicago, some who self-define in ways other than artists, like Elijah Rodriguez and soil ecologist Nancy Clem, who, Kate, I think you should talk to at some point. and others who very much self-define as primarily as artists, like Theaster Gates, Amanda Williams. And then we also moved outside the city to spend time in forest ecosystems outside Chicago. And we made a picture on the beach together. But all of this was, a lot of the kind of the thickness of it came through the conversations that happen as you're moving, as you're kind of getting to know each other and kind of building something over a set of days. And then, that's continued, and then, back to the land on Vancouver Island this past summer. And in this summer, we did a lot of artist-led activities alongside some of the other more kind of science-led experiences that we've had in the past. And in this, Kelly Richardson, a lot of her work is really predicated on a kind of deep understanding of the biology of the region, and which will appear in this digital work that she's creating. That's a kind of digital landscape. And so we spent time with an Indigenous biologist moving out through the site of a traditional root garden that's been, thankfully it hasn't been built over, but it hasn't been tended. So we got to spend time in that context and really dig in the dirt and feel what it was like to have our hands in that context, to spend time looking at the abundant life in tidal pools, but also was thinking about your time with your colleagues who were lying and listening to the sound work. Here we were doing a kind of sound activation, sort of listening to the ocean, listening to the sounds of the beach, and then co-creating a performative work on the beach. And then the end of these summer gatherings, which Randy has been calling the Tree of Life gatherings. They usually end with ceremony in a big house, which is the site, a traditional kind of architectural structure in Kwakwaka'wakw culture that is a site both of ceremony and of governance. And it's got a very specific kind of architectural setup, 5 minutes ago, a very specific architectural setup, and but it's indoors. And this summer, for the first time ever, we experienced a kind of temporary big house setup on a clear-cut site where a group of chiefs got together to hold a morning ceremony for the land. It was incredibly powerful to have the speaker for the chief of all chiefs of the Kwakwaka'wakw people stand up and talk about how for 14,000 years they have had unbroken presence on these lands. And never before in that history, going back so many centuries, have they needed to have a morning ceremony for the land. And so that was a very powerful shared experience. And just really quickly, I'm going to run through the last stretch because I want to do a version of what we did in Chicago here with all of you. Since my colleagues aren't able to be here with me, I hope that we can plant some seeds and maybe some collaboration can emerge out of this context and these relations. Next summer, we're going to going back to a place that we had just briefly visited in 2022, Hiladi, which is a site that Tsatsakilas, who is sitting at the left, who's this amazing matriarch and activist, is essentially squatting this land to kind of step outside Canadian governance, which says that She and her people do not have the right to be there, and she's living there. And Randy is going to be going back this spring and building a platform, in a kind of ecologically sensitive platform that will become the foundation for a future outdoor big house, where ceremony can be practiced, where governance can be enacted, again, stepping outside what Canada says is the law, but is traditional law as practiced by his people. And he and Kelly, 2 pieces of her work, Paul showing some work of his in process, Lindsay, all of them have been developing new works coming out of these shared experiences with the land. She mentioned Solhex is a cyborg who Lindsay is developing, who lives 1,000 years in the future where there are no humans left, but these indigenous cyborgs who have a heart, a human heart that's the kind of the trace of human presence. So they're all of them are going to be creating performances on this platform, on the land, as an offering back to the land, as an offering to the colleagues who have been amazing sources of inspiration and kind of shared relationship building over these many years of coming back to the land. And then we're hoping that this work then moves out into the world through exhibitions, through conversation, through site-specific activations, and also just through kind of shared conversation and relation. And so I'll close with a couple of images related to fire. Fireweed is a plant that I did not know before I started going to British Columbia, but it's this kind of pinky purpley weed there. And Kelly really introduced me to this plant, but then I've been learning about it for others because it is one of the first things to grow in a clear-cut site. It was a plant that apparently grew in London after the German bombs. Like, you can find it in many, many places. And it has medicinal properties, but it also has soil stabilization properties. And so it grows, it brings health back to the soil. It also dies when its work is done, and it's prepared the way for the new trees that will emerge. So thinking about fire in that way, thinking about fire from an image from that summer or that spring visit in 2023 when my colleagues were in Chicago, and at the end of our week together, where we've been really thinking, like, why should people in Chicago care about this thing that's happening in British Columbia? Partly it was because the fires in Canada create smoke that reach across the borders. And of course, so we could see here the red sun with that particulate matter. So, and that's just a physical manifestation of something that's true in so many other ways, that we are all connected, we are all impacted by choices that are made in other places. And also thinking about fires like this one. This was a campfire by the beach towards the end of that first trip, and thinking about the kind of warm circle and the ways that we can be together, we can get warm around a fire and can regain strength to go out and do the work that needs to be done. Thank you.